What's up, good people? Nathan here from the Self Productions YouTube channel, back again with another deck tech. This is Animar Soul of the Elements. Boy, does this deck go fast. We're focusing on a non-combo Cascade theme for this deck, using a lot of cantrips, a lot of cards that replace themselves, and of course leveraging Cascade and using free spells to stack counters onto Animar in order to power out a lot of creatures, assemble a giant board state by around turn 5 or 6, and then win the game with an Alpha Strike. Before we get into it, I'd like to ask to leave a like on the video and subscribe if you like this kind of content. I come out with deck techs like these regularly. Also, 2 points, there will be 2 companion videos that will be linked down in the description below, one of which I will be goldfishing this deck so you can see how it actually plays in a goldfishing setting, and also there will be a budget version of this deck where I will actually physically purchase the cards of this deck for about $100. So those videos will be down in the description below, and check those out if you're interested. And now let's read our broken teamer commander. Animar Soul of Elements is a 3-mana 1/1 elemental, protection from white and black, which are 2 of the best colors for removal in Commander. Whenever you cast a creature spell, put a 1/1 counter on our commander, and then creature spells we cast cost 1 less to cast for each 1/1 counter on Animar. Now, there's a couple ways you can take Animar when building him. You can take it via the combo route, leveraging things like Ancestral Statue, Teamer Sabertooth to essentially give yourself infinite ETB or mana. There's also a way to focus on the +1/+1 counter sub-theme, where you're trying to just stack counters onto Animar to maximize that ability. This particular build focuses on free casts, leveraging a lot of Cascade keywording, Discover from Lost Cannons of Ixalan, and also just a lot of draw in general. This is a very offensive oriented deck with 13 pieces of draw and card advantage and 12 cantrips and tutors. The deck also is a little on the expensive side. Tapped Out is quoting around $380 here at market price. However, I'd rather trust the Scryfall dollar value, quoting about $570. We are running all 3 fetch lands. We are not running any OG duels for this particular build, and if you were to cut the 3 fetch lands, you would shave off about $150. And then if you were to focus on the next couple most expensive cards, such as the Ozolith and also Atali Primal Conqueror, for example, you can cut a further $80 to $90 off of the deck. So there are ways to make Animar budget. In fact, like I said, I built a $100 version of this deck, but we are generally not really taking cost into account. We are really just trying to focus on the fastest way to power out a board state for this particular build, and for that we landed around the $550 range. All right, so let's get into the overall turn order for how we are going to play Animar in a typical EDH game. First, in our first couple of turns, we don't necessarily want to be ramping on turn 1 or even turn 2, but it is nice if we do have 2-mana ramp in our hand. Hey folks, Editor Nathan here. Just wanted to provide a little bit more context around the lack of 1-drop mana dorks that I am intentionally not running in this build. A lot of folks like to run cards like Birds of Paradise, Delighted Halfling, and Elvish Mystic in order to play Animar on turn 2. There's a couple of reasons why I think that's incorrect for this particular build. The first is that 1-drop mana dorks weaken our future cascades. There's nothing more anticlimactic than hitting an Elvish Mystic off of a big Maelstrom Wanderer play, for example, and we want to be very conscious of what we're running on the lower end of the mana curve, because these cards we will see more often off of our Cascade triggers. The second reason is that we want to be very conscious around playing around board wipes. Board wipes are the natural answer to our deck, which aims to assemble a massive board state, and so if we're going to be cascading into ramp pieces, I'd rather have those pieces generate lands on board that are protected from creature-based board wipes. Finally, while playing Animar on turn 2 is very powerful, it will immediately make you the archenemy at the table, and we want to remain a little bit more incognito by playing our commander on turn 3, which is when the rest of the table will typically be playing their commanders as well, because a lot of folks will play Nature's Lore 3 Visits on turn 2, and then with 4 mana they will cast their 4-mana commander on turn 3. So that's it for me. Back to the video. Our best 2 mana ramp piece is Biophagus, which will allow our commander to enter with 1/1/1 counter immediately when the mana is used to cast it. That's a great turn to play. Also, we have Bloom Tender, which is a mana dork that will add Temur mana as soon as Animar hits the field on turn 3. Rishkar Pima Renegade is another way to get counters on Animar pretty quickly, and because you probably won't be tapping with Animar for attacking in the early couple of turns, it is best to use him to tap for mana, which Rishkar allows him to do. Solemn Simulacrum will be a better ramp piece to play once Animar has 1 or 2 1/1 counters, and it is a generally non-threatening way to progress in lands throughout the game. One thing you'll find that in this ramp slot, I'm only really running these 3 mana dorks because the others I like to tutor lands from the deck in order to protect against board wipes. We don't want to be putting all of our chips into our creatures to generate advantage because if we are board wiped, we don't want our mana to be evaporating along with our army. And so it's better to play cards like Solemn Simulacrum and Springbloom Druid in order to power out lands onto the field, which generally are protected in Commander. There's also Thieving Skydiver, which is one of my favorite cards in a blue because it basically says a 3 mana 2/1 flyer, steal target player's soul ring, although kicker can be whatever you want it to be. So with Animar, we can actually reduce the costs of kicker because when you declare a casting cost, that cost is then further reduced by your discounts. So kicker works with the reduction with Animar, and so you can actually use this as a very good removal piece in addition to ramp. Then we have Wood Elves, which powers out a forest card for further mana fixing. You can use this to grab Ketria Triumph for maximum color fixing at the cost of it entering tapped. And our last ramp piece here is Eric Smethy's Slumbering Isle, which is a 4 mana 12/12 Kraken. It enters with 5 slumber counters. As long as it has a slumber counter on it, it's a land, which is primarily why we're running it, because it is then invulnerable to creature-based board wipes, being a land. And then key point here, whenever you cast a spell, you may remove a slumber counter from Eric Smethy's. So we can actually keep Eric Smethy's at 1 slumber counter. It will be a land until we need to animate and turn the land into a giant creature. Assuming that we can cast this, on turn 4 or 5, we'll easily be able to turn it into a 12/12 if we want, but it's better to hold it back and wait for the opportune moment to turn it into a threatening creature. Once Animar hits the field on turn 3, one of the best types of spells we'd like to see in our hand is a Cascade spell or a cantrip or tutor spell. So the idea here is to multi-spell as fast as we can. So a card like Bloodbraid Elf, which is a 4 mana 3/2 with haste and Cascade, is exactly what we want to be doing because the Cascade, by the nature of how many creatures we're running, is very, very likely to hit another creature. So we're really just abusing Animar's counter stacking as much as we can. We're running 58 creatures. And only, let's see, 5 non-creatures in the deck. And the cards that we would probably hit off of a Cascade or Discover trigger would be something like an Anduril Narsil Reforged, which can let us get 2 1/1 counters on each creature we control, and also the Ozolith, which is going to act as a protection piece for Animar that I will talk about in a little bit. But generally, we want to be seeing these 3 mana tutors and cantrips, something like a Geological Appraiser, which is great to just cast on turn 4 for 4 mana, gets us that Discover 3 trigger, which key note here, Discover allows us to actually put the spell into our hand if we don't want to cast it at the time that the trigger resolves. Emoti, Celebrant of Bounty is going to be a 5 mana Cascade and gives our other expensive spells Cascade for more multi-spelling. And then we have an option like Imperial Recruiter, which is a 3 mana 1/1. When it ETBs, tutor up a creature card with power 2 or less, put it into our hand, then shuffle. Some of the best targets for this would be, again, like a Bane of Progress, which can allow us to wipe all artifacts and enchantments. However, we have Pygmy Kavu if you have a lot of black players at the table. This is one of my personal pet cards and favorites just because black tends to be the most common color played in Commander. If you actually look up the most common decks, the most popular decks are either mono black or incorporate black in some way. And so Pygmy Kavu is just a great card to see. On average, will draw you 2 or 3 cards. Or if you want to play defensively, there's Duplicant or Foundation Breaker. And we can even get a Glenelenda Archmage to protect our board. However, if you want to play more offensively with Imperial Recruiter, we can grab Forgotten Ancient, which will put a bunch bunch of 1/1 counters on a creature, usually Animar in this instance, to give us further discounts. And then if we are really mana screwed and we just want more lands, we can grab a Tower Winder, which will grab us Command Tower. Then we have Maelstrom Wanderer, which is one of my personal favorite cards. 8 mana, 7/5 elemental creatures you control have haste, and we get 2 Cascade triggers, so this is just an army in a can. Noise Marine is a Cascade trigger with a bonus removal spell attached to it to help pick off any utility creature. Shardless Agent is a 3 mana 2/2 with Cascade, enabling that multi-Cascade on turn 4. Tower Winder, like I said, can grab us the best land in our deck. Then we have Treasure Mage, which can grab us an artifact card with CMC 6 or greater, and for that I have 2 options here. We can grab a duplicate to exile a target non-token creature, or more importantly, we could grab a Scion of Draco, which will give creatures we control with blue hexproof, so thereby protecting Animar. The bonus here is green creatures will also get Trample, which is more important, I think, than giving our red creatures first strike. However, that is a nice bonus, and typically Scion of Draco will only cost 6, being that we were running Teamer colors, and then with Animar's discount applied on top of that, he would cost even less. Finally, we have Trumpeting Carnosaur, which is a great 6 mana, 7/6 dinosaur with trample when ETBs discover 5. And the reason why I am running this in particular is the modality of the last ability. We can pay 3 and discard it as an emergency button to deal 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker. You would not believe the amount of times that you just need to deal 3 damage to that one problem creature and commander. Things like a Draenith Magistrate, or to get like a Spellskite out of the way, or something like that. Riku of the Two Reflections, shout out to my friend Carter. Sometimes you just need to deal 3 damage to something, and so Trumpeting Carnosaur deals or gives us that flexibility to be both removal or a multi-spell. And then our card draw category is some of the best in the game. What we desperately want in this deck, because we're going to be discounting our creatures so much, is to keep refilling our hand as long as Animar is on the field. And so the best cards that we can get on the field to refill our hands would be cards like a Beast Whisperer, which will draw us a card on every creature cast. We also want to see a Primordial Sage, which is the exact same effect but for 6 mana. And we also want to see a Soul of the Harvest, which does the exact same effect but on ETB. There's a new card out, I believe, called Vault-Born Tyrant. Let's see if I need the slash in here. Vault-Born Tyrant is rather expensive, but does functionally the same thing and gains us life and has that built-in bit of protection. So that card I would certainly consider running if you have the budget for it, but it is rather expensive. Then we have Bonehorde Dracosaur, which is a pretty pushed dinosaur dragon from Lost Caverns, I believe. 5 mana, 5/5 flying first strike. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play them this turn. If you exiled a land card this way, create a 3/1 red dinosaur creature token, or if you exiled a non-land card this way, create a treasure token. So it gives us both card advantage and ramp and board presence all in one card. This is just so good. Then we have Etali Primal Conqueror, which will basically get us 4 free casts from our opponents. We're going to assume that 2 to 3 of these are creature spells, further discounting Animar, but again, just leveraging the free spell archetype here to play as many as we can, and it has the bonus of being a Blightsteel Colossus on the back as an 11/11 trample indestructible with Infect. Then we have Etali Primal Storm, Itali's budget little brother. 6 mana, 6/6. Whenever it attacks, exile the top card of each player's library, and then you may cast any number of spells from among those without paying their mana cost. So a little bit of random chance there to get the actual cast. That's why people call this the fair version of Etali, which is completely fair. Generous Patron is one of the best spells we can honestly see on turn 4 because it enters supporting 2, which means put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 other target creatures. And it says whenever you put 1 or more counters on a creature you don't control, draw a card. So I am more than happy in a game of Commander to give my opponents 2 1/1 counters to draw 2 cards. Generally, Divination is seen as bad in Commander. However, when you attach it to a creature body, then it turns out to be very good because you can reanimate and leverage synergies and things like this. But if we want to, we can actually power out Animar's cost reduction ability even more by putting the 1/1 counters on Animar instead of our opponent's creatures. So I would say 50% of the time, you're just going to want to use this to draw cards. And then if we still want Animar to power out something huge in our hand, like an Apex Devastator, which is a 10 drop, then we can definitely put this 1/1 counter on Animar to accelerate him even more. Then we have Metziel Mugger, which is a 5-mana 3/3 Viashino Rogue with Blitz 3, which I would say we're going to be blitzing this for 99% of the time. But whenever Metziel Mugger attacks, exile the top card of each player's library. You may play those cards this turn, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast those spells. So this basically allows us to draw 5 cards off of 3 mana, because the Blitz will draw us a card when it is sacrificed at the beginning of the next end step, and we theoretically get 4 impulse draws off of each player's library. So definitely make sure to save your lands in hand to allow yourself to play lands out of the opponent's cards if lands are flipped, which they most likely will be for Metziel Mugger trigger. Then we have both Muldrifter and Nulldrifter, which we're happy to play. Just pay 1 blue to draw 2 cards. Again, Evoke is affected by the cost reduction on Animar, and so we can often draw 2 cards for only 1 mana. And Nulldrifter has the added bonus where if it's late in the game when we actually want the 4/4 Flying Annihilator 1 body, we can actually cast this without convoking it. Then we have Plarg and Nasari, which is a 5-mana 5/4 Orc Efreet. At the beginning of your upkeep, each player exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card, so it is guaranteed to hit. Then an opponent will choose the best out of those cards, and then you can cast up to 2 from the other 3 without paying their mana cost. So generally the best spell will be exiled out of this pile, but this still allows us to multi-spell for free, casting creatures for free. Primordial Sage we already covered. Pygmy Kavu, again, can draw a lot of cards if you're in a black heavy meta. Soul of the Harvest and the Vizier of the Menagerie will give us pseudo card advantage by allowing us to play creature cards from the top of our library, and we can look at the top card at any time. And then what I am really playing this for as well is the last line. You may spend mana as though it were many mana of any color to cast creature spells. Often what you will find is that Animar reduces the colorless casting cost of creatures almost entirely, and so we generally are only tied to how much colored mana our mana base can produce. And so Vizier of the Menagerie helps us to smooth that out a little bit. If we need like 1 blue, for example, to cast an Amphin Mutineer off the top for free, and we only have like a forest that's untapped, for example. So that's kind of the goal of Vizier, is that it also color fixes us. Now, how are we going to be winning the game? There's a few finishers and buffers that I'd like to review. Andoril Narsil Reforged can put 2 1/1 counters on each creature we control whenever the equipped creature attacks, and we are happy to cast this for 5 mana. It's pretty much assumed that we'll get the Ascend portion of this, given that we are casting so many creatures for free. Then there's Blast Furnace Hellkite. It's a little bit of an expensive dragon. However, this gives creatures attacking your opponents double strike, including our creatures, and it itself will be able to deal 10 damage because it has flying and double strike. The artifact offering really doesn't matter too much because we're not running any artifacts worth sacrificing for this. But again, with Animar, reducing all of your creatures, this is fantastic to see in the late game. Defiler of Vigor can turn our cards into 1/1 counters that we play, because whenever we cast a green permanent spell, we can put a 1/1 counter on each creature we control. And this also eliminates the 1 green pip out of the casting costs of our green permanent spells, and so that is just excellent because it enables us to cast creatures for free once Animar has reduced the colorless casting cost entirely. Then we have Elrond of the White Council, and this card is a little bit of a tome, so bear with me. When this card ETBs, each player secretly votes for Fellowship or Aid. Then those votes are revealed. For each Fellowship vote, the voter chooses a creature they control. You gain control of each creature chosen this way, and they gain this creature can't attack its owner. Then for each Aid vote, put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. So how the voting will go typically is that we will vote for Aid by putting 1/1 counter on each creature we control, and then our 3 opponents will typically vote for Fellowship because they're essentially just giving you their worst creature. Generally, they don't want us to be putting 1/1 counters on our creatures, but if they happen to, we would actually prefer that instead, but most of the time we're going to assume they choose Fellowship. So this essentially says make 3 bodies in addition to Elrond of the White Council, and then also put a 1/1 counter on each creature we control, which is pretty solid. Forgotten Ancient again can power out Animar with more 1/1 counters, and Primeval Protector is quite often a 1 mana 10/10, and it will ETB putting a 1/1 counter on each creature we control. Then in the finishers category, we have Apex Devastator, which simply says Cascade, 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 and is a 10/10 creature. So this one you always want to be saving until after the board wipe. This will allow you to rebuild immediately by just getting a ton of value out on the board. If we cascade into more Cascade creatures, we just filled our board with bodies. So this is a card that you will want to sandbag a lot of the time because you want to be casting this on turn 7 or 8 after that second board wipe has happened. Then we have Earthshaker Giant, just a great overrun on a 6/6 trample body. And we're also running literal overrun. Now, right before this video, I was thinking about this deck build, and originally in the slot was Craterhoof Behemoth, and I thought, you know what? Of the ways that I want to make this deck unique, I'm going to take the typical staple Creative Behemoth out and substitute in just a normal overrun. And so, folks, we are running a normal overrun in 2024 Commander. That's right. However, its better cousin is Overwhelming Stampede, which we're also running. 5 mana, sorcery until end of turn. Creatures you control gain trampling at +X/+X, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Then we have Pathbreaker Ibex, which is the same thing but on a body. This one is very, very telegraphed and is a very scary creature, so just be aware that this deck, if you are not already the archenemy, you will be an archenemy with Pathbreaker Ibex on the field because it will give that same effect when it attacks. The key here is that we also want to be giving our creatures haste, which is part of the reason why we're running Maelstrom Wanderer and other creatures that give our creatures haste. Now, one little key card here that doesn't fit neatly into any other category is the Ozolith. This is a 1-mana legendary artifact. Whenever a creature you control leaves play, if it had counters on it, put those +1/+1 counters on the Ozolith. And then at the beginning of combat on your turn, if the Ozolith has counters on it, you may move those creature counters from the Ozolith onto target creature. And think of this card as a protection piece for Animar. If Animar is removed by perhaps a lightning bolt, for example, then the Ozolith is a good way to preserve those counters, and it really says, look, you're going to have to kill both Animar and this artifact in order to really shut down the mana discounts that is the entire goal of this deck. It is also one of those cards that, because it's so cheap, it doesn't feel good to get rid of from your opponent's perspective, considering it's only 1 mana, but you'll happily cast Animar for 5 mana, have the Ozolith trigger, and then cast more creatures in your second main phase if the Ozolith stays on the field. So in this slot, if you were to maybe do a budget cut and actually cut this card out, I would honestly consider replacing this with a counter spell, something like an Offer You Can't Refuse or March of the Swirling Mist, for example, to give that protection. You could even run Hardened Scales, which will give Animar more +1/+1 counters whenever his ability triggers, and that is yet another permanent that's only 1 mana and so is very low investment. Now for defense, what are we actually running to interact with our opponents? Well, Amphin Mutineer will be able to exile up to 1 target non-salamander creature, the exile being key so that graveyard shenanigans cannot abuse their graveyard, and then that is replaced by a 4/3. And also what I like about Amphin Mutineer is once you chump block with this, you can then encore it to get 3 creatures, and yes, they create the 4/3 bodies, but generally when we are looking to swing out, we're going to be overrunning where power and toughness doesn't really matter as much, and so I would happily destroy like a Blood Artist, for example, or a Zulaport Cutthroat, and leave just a generic 4/3 and just get beaten down by the 4/3 and leave up some blockers. Then there's Cankerbloom, which is a little bit of a modal card here because we'll generally be able to cast it for 1 and we can crack it and pay 1 to either destroy target enchantment, or target artifact, or proliferate. And the proliferate is nice for not only Animar, but if we happen to have counters from a Primeval Protector, we can just continue to grow our team. Then we have Druid of Purification, which can net us up to 3 other target artifacts or enchantments if there are particular Staxy type of enchantments on the field. Generally, your opponents will want those off the board. However, just be aware that your opponents can collude to basically choose the same card that you choose because you vote first. Then we have Duplicant, which is just nice to exile target non-token creature. There's another card that is similar to Duplicant called Phyrexian Ingester, which is 1 more mana, but gives you a bigger body at the end of the day. But we are running Duplicant because it can also be searched by Treasure Mage. We also have Foundation Breaker, which most of the time is going to be a 1 mana sorcery speed spell that says you may destroy target artifact or enchantment. However, again, if we have Animar with enough 1/1 counters, we can cast this for 1 mana and still get that effect and keep the 2/2 body. We also have Glenalendra Archmage, which is a great defensive tool to ward off board wipes, and it has Persist, which has unique synergy with +1/+1 counters. If Glenalendra is persisted as a 1/1 on the field with that -1/-1 counter, and we followed up with a Primeval Protector to place a 1/1 counter on it, those counters actually cancel out, meaning that we can use we can rather trigger the persist ability again, because when it hits the yard, it will see that there's no counter on Glenalendra, thus returning it. Clydesdale Larcenist is a pretty efficient card that will hit up to 3 other artifacts or creatures, and it will turn those into treasures while it is still on the field. And I like this card because it has Ward 1, it presents just a little bit of a barrier for opponents to remove it, so that it's a much bigger threat to be removed than Animar if it is taking other commanders hostage, for example. And it's great to just hit other commanders because it transforms them instead of exiling them or forcing a zone change where they can go back to the command zone. Then we have Smirking Spelljacker, which we're hoping is going to be a 1 mana 3/3 counter spell. It is a Genie Wizard Rogue with Flash and Flying. When it ETBs, exile a target spell an opponent controls. And then when it attacks, if a card is exiled with it, you may cast it without paying its cost. So this is, again, what we're going to be holding up as a counter spell. And I like to note as well, in case we hit it with a Trumpeting Carnosaur, which has Discover 5, you don't have to cast the creature off of the Discover trigger, and you can just put it into your hand. So once we have Animar all powered up, we have a few creatures on board, we're really going to want to be holding Smirking Spelljacker and just holding up 1 blue mana for essentially the rest of the game to be able to defend against a board wipe. And we have Standard Menace, Terror of the Peaks, 5 mana 5/4 flyer. Spells your opponents cast that target it cost an additional 3 life to cast, but more importantly, whenever another creature ETBs in our control, Terror of the Peaks deals damage equal to that creature's power to any target. So this will just either burn face or take out important pieces on the board. Thalakos Deceiver is also a great card, especially if it has haste. It's a 4 mana 1/1 wizard with shadow, meaning this creature can block or be blocked only by creatures with shadow, and we can sack it when it is attacking and unblocked to gain control of target creature permanently. So this is a nice removal spell that, if we don't have haste, will take 1 turn to kick in, but other than that, it can basically steal just the best creature off of the board because shadow is not a very prominent ability in Commander. And then we have some board wipes and other interaction here. So we're running Balefire Dragon to burn out all of our opponent's creatures. Bane of Progress is a 6 mana 2/2 artifact enchantment wipe, and we also get a huge body at the end of the day with it. Our Goad creatures include Geode Rager, which will allow us to play a land to goad each creature target player controls to really turn off combat. And I love this too because we can essentially repeat the landfall each turn, assuming that we're drawing a lot of cards with our card draw slots up here, to basically always be negating the most scary opponent's board. So Geode Rager is just a great pick here. Then we have a new card from Modern Horizons 3, Hideous Taskmaster. It's a 7 mana 7/2 with Devoid. When we cast the spell, for each opponent gain control of up to 1 target creature that player controls until end of turn. Untap those creatures, they gain Trample, Haste, and Annihilator 1 until end of turn, and itself has Trample, Haste, and Annihilator 1. So I absolutely love getting 4 Annihilator triggers for 7 mana here. One card you would maybe run in this slot instead would be a Molten Primordial, which has an ETB trigger, so it's more abusable that way. Or you could maybe consider like an Endrace Forerunners or something like that. But I don't like those as much because I like to focus on the Annihilator trigger and really force interaction with the opponents. And then finally, we have Sontaran General, which is from the Doctor Who set. 5 mana 5/5 Trample Haste. When it and at least 2 other creatures attack for each opponent, goad up to 1 target creature that player controls. Those creature can't block this turn. So if we want to get through with our Sontaran General and continue to generate value off of it, we essentially make it so the most potent blocker cannot block, maybe a Death Touch type of creature. And we can also goad more scary creatures if we don't mind being blocked. So there's a little bit of modality with that ability. And again, because it has haste, we can get this, the turn it comes down. And because we're running so much card draw and free spells, being able to attack with 2 creatures should be no problem, considering that we're going to be just vomiting as many creatures as we can onto the field. And then finally, I'll cover the mana base here. This mana base is optimized for color production. We're running just an absolute ton of creatures, so Ancient Ziggurat is a shoo-in. We're running the shock lands, filter lands. We have Command Tower, of course. The slow lands, Exotic Orchard, we're basically thinking that would tap for all 3 of our Temur colors. Fabled Passage can get us a color of each as a basic. More filter lands, more filter lands. We're running a total of 7 basics in the deck. And then I believe our only utility land is Lorien Revealed, which will allow us to draw 3 cards or search up an island, which can color fix us. So something like a Ketria Triumph, which we can get, which will enter tapped. And then we're also running the fetch lands, Misty Rainforest, lands like Wooded Foothills as well. Then there's also Plaza of Heroes, which is a little bit expensive, but we'll always be able to cast Animar. Reflecting Pool, again, assuming that this will tap us for all 3 Temur colors. And then the rest of these, I believe, are more of the same. We have some check lands in the form of Rootbound Crag, and most of the time we'll have mountains or forests, again, just based on how much we're going to be drawing and how many typed lands we are running. And then let's see, I think that's it. We have a couple of pain lands as well, just to make sure that they enter untapped and also tap for all of our colors. And then really quickly, our land analysis here, we have 27 green producers, 26 blue, 26 red. We have only 3 tapped lands and 34 untapped lands to be able to cast Animar on turn 3, almost 100% of the time. 9 of our lands result in life loss, and then there are 2 utility lands. That is the video, guys. That is the deck tech. Again, I will be posting a companion video where you can see how this deck actually runs. This deck performs tremendously well. It vomits creatures onto the battlefield, and even if our game plan is disrupted via a board wipe or by removing Animar, we have so much value by sending resources to our hand that we can continue to play into the late game and just fight through all of the removal that our opponents may have. So with that being said, that is the deck tech, guys. Thank you all for watching once again. If you enjoy this type of content, leave a like on the video or subscribe if you enjoy this type of content. I make deck techs like this on the regular. And hopefully I will see you all in the next one.